people disappearing in our public park systems. They merely vanished.
She was 66 years old, I think, maybe a little older. Phenomenal shape. She'd call her husband all the time. One day didn't call. Massive search. Maine Warden Service threw everything at that search, and even the wardens said they couldn't believe they didn't find anything of her. So a man named George Penka disappeared on one of the biggest trails in Yosemite 2 years ago. And I know some of the people that were involved with that, and they said there's no way that guy could have disappeared. He was a robust man, not in terrific shape. He wasn't going to go anywhere off the trail. He vanished, and to this day, they've never found him.
In the heart of Yosemite, a decorated police detective named David Paulides followed the rules until rangers quietly urged him to break his silence. After 2 decades with San Jose Police Department, Paulides built his reputation on cold facts, not campfire stories. Now, his relentless investigation exposes a forbidden link between missing 411 disappearances and Bigfoot encounters, a connection authorities continue to deny no matter the cost. If what Paulides has uncovered is true, the danger lurking in America's national parks is far stranger and far closer than anyone is willing to admit. But how does a respected cop become an outcast for telling the truth? That's where this story begins. David Paulides wore the badge for 2 decades, starting in 1977. San Jose Police Department, SWAT, Detective Division, Vice and Intelligence, each role left its mark. He learned to read a room before he entered it, to separate what was said from what was meant. By the late 1980s, his name was on the short list for high-risk warrants. He ran psychological evaluations like clockwork, passing every time. One department psychologist wrote that Paulides hadn't hardened the way most cops do. No cynicism, just a habit of cataloging details, even in the middle of chaos. Commendations came from cases that went sideways and still ended with cuffs or closure. He logged time in the field, but also behind the desk, sifting through case files, looking for patterns that didn't belong. The job was never just about the arrest. It was about the why, the how, and the what next. His time with the Street Crimes Unit and later as a detective sharpened that instinct. When a case landed on his desk, he didn't just follow the paper trail. He built it step by step until there was nowhere left for the truth to hide. The badge taught him to trust evidence over rumor, to see the difference between noise and signal. These habits, methodical, relentless, grounded in fact, became the spine of every investigation he touched, long after the uniform was packed away. North America Bigfoot search started in 2004, but the approach wasn't campfire stories or wild guesses. Paulides built it like a cold case squad. Every report got the full treatment. Interviews, timelines, site diagrams, affidavits. He drove up to the Hoopa Valley, not with a recorder and a handshake, but with a stack of forms and a plan to stay until every loose end was tied down. The Hoopa Project, wrapped in 2008, didn't just collect tales. It gathered sworn statements, mapped sightings, and paired each account with a sketch drawn by Harvey Pratt, a forensic artist with an FBI badge and Cheyenne roots. Pratt's sketches weren't cartoons. He worked with witnesses for hours, revising every jawline and brow ridge until the image matched the memory. Each one was signed off, affidavit attached, chain of custody logged. Witnesses vouched for what they saw, and then vouched again on paper. Paulides' method was slow, almost surgical. He didn't chase rumors. He built a case file, cross-referenced with weather reports, animal migration data, and tribal knowledge. The Hoopa project documented 16 incidents and 33 sightings, each one plotted on a map, each one tested against the others for patterns. The consensus sketches didn't match the TV monster. Broad noses, heavy brows, hair that fell in waves, not a single cartoonish ape face in the lot. By 2009, tribal Bigfoot expanded the search. Paulides tracked reports from Minnesota to Oklahoma, always returning to the same thread. Native American witnesses, old stories, new encounters, all pointing to something that didn't fit the wildlife guides. The difference was in the paperwork. Every story came with a signature, every sketch with a witness statement, every claim checked against the others. If a new report landed, he'd pull the old files and look for overlap, stride length, time of day, weather, animal signs. Nothing left to chance. The process built trust, first with tribal police, then with elders, then with families who never told outsiders what they'd seen. By the time the first park ranger approached him, Paulides had a reputation. No hype, no shortcuts, just the kind of casework that gets results in homicide, now turned loose on the biggest mystery in the woods. The ranger didn't approach in the open. He trailed Paulides along a stretch of the Yosemite backroads, boots crunching in the dust, close enough to catch a name, but not a conversation. When the distance shrank, his first words were measured, eyes flicking to the tree line, as if even the pines might be listening. He waited until the rest of the group had drifted ahead, then stepped in so quietly, it felt like a warning. "You're the Bigfoot guy, right?" The question wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't casual either. He kept his voice low, barely above the wind. "You ever notice how some of these missing person cases don't add up?" Paulides listened. The ranger's badge wasn't visible, but the weight of it was in his posture, in the way he spoke about the lost, names he wouldn't repeat, details he wouldn't share out loud. He didn't mention monsters, didn't mention the word Bigfoot, but he described patterns. Hikers vanishing from well-marked trails, search teams finding nothing but the echo of their own boots, families left with silence and case numbers. "There's files you'll never see," the ranger said. "Stuff that doesn't make sense if you've worked these woods long enough." The conversation was brief. The ranger's shift ended at the trailhead, and he melted away before anyone else noticed. But the message stuck. There were gaps in the official story, and someone inside wanted them noticed. Paulides didn't get a file, just a direction. Start looking at the cases nobody wanted to talk about. The ranger's words left a mark deeper than any footprint. For the first time, Paulides was being asked to look past the creature stories and into something heavier, something the park itself seemed to swallow. A second ranger stepped out of the background, boots scuffing gravel, eyes steady on Paulides. Not the look of someone chasing rumors. He spoke with the same guarded edge, but this time the details came sharper. Dates, names, search logs that didn't add up. 2 rangers, different districts, both circling the same question. Why did certain cases vanish from the system? Why did official reports end in blank space? Paulides listened, cataloging each pause, each sidelong glance. The air felt charged. Like the moment before a thunderhead cracks open, these weren't idle complaints. The rangers weren't trading ghost stories, they were passing off a burden, the kind that sticks to your boots and doesn't wash off. "You're the only one who's actually listening," the second ranger said, voice low. The only one who's got the background to see what's missing. Paulides left the park that day with more than a tip. He had a direction, case numbers scribbled on a notepad, search grid coordinates, hints of files that had been quietly pulled from circulation. The shift was immediate. Bigfoot was still in the rear view, but now the focus sharpened to the people who disappeared without a trace. The maps that lit up with clusters where the woods grew thick and the stories got thin. The decision wasn't made at a desk or in some conference room. It happened in the dust, with the weight of law enforcement pressing in from both sides. By spring of 2009, the hunt for patterns began in earnest. Paulides started plotting disappearances on wall-sized maps, marking each one with a pin, looking for the logic that the official records refused to show. The mission was no longer about explaining shadows in the trees. It was about tracking the names that had slipped between the cracks and finding out why the park's own guardians were afraid to speak above a whisper. Pushpins started to fill the map. First a scatter, then a thickening, then whole regions lit up like warnings. 62 clusters, each one a knot of names and unresolved endings, spread across the continent with a logic that did not match population, weather, or accident statistics. Yosemite glowed at the center, the largest cluster by far. More than a dozen disappearances in the valley alone, each case marked with a color-coded tag for age, time of year, last known position. Olympic National Park, Great Smoky Mountains, the Hoopa Reservation, each with their own constellations. Some clusters hugged the edges of deep forest, others ringed lakes or followed the spine of mountain passes. The gaps were as telling as the clusters themselves. A band of emptiness ran straight down the middle of the country, from North Dakota to Texas. No pins, no patterns, just blank space where the land flattens and the woods thin out. The numbers refused to fade into background noise. 52 clusters in the US, 10 more in Canada. Some clusters held only 2 or 3 names, a pair of vanished hikers, or a missing child and a lost hunter. Others stacked up, 8, 12, sometimes more, each one a case file with its own sharp edges and unanswered questions. Paulides' wall-sized maps, layered with acetate overlays and hand-drawn grid lines, made the patterns impossible to ignore. The same parks kept surfacing: Yosemite, Olympic, Shasta, Smoky Mountains, Crater Lake, each one a hotspot, each one resisting easy explanation. No matter how the data was sorted, by year, by age, by weather, by search effort, the clusters held. The spread was not random, not the way drownings or lost hikers usually show up. The pins lined up with terrain features and old tribal boundaries, not with highways or ranger stations. The evidence did not care about theories or reputations. It just sat there, silent and stubborn, daring anyone to explain why some places seemed to draw people in and never let them go. The checklist grew longer with every file. Patterns that belonged together but never showed up in official reports. Water? Always close. Streams, lakes, even shallow creeks, no matter the season. The missing weren't just lost. They were found in places that demanded answers. Bodies turned up uphill from last known points, sometimes miles beyond what search teams could cover in a day. Children too small to hike a quarter mile were found 3 or 4 miles out, across ridges or over rivers, shoes clean, when they should have been shredded. No sign of animal predation. No sign of panic. Sometimes, no sign at all. The details repeated. Weather shifts, storms rolling in just after a disappearance, fog banks that swallowed search parties, dogs brought in to track the scent would circle, whine, then lie down or refuse to work. Searchers mapped the last known position, then found clothing folded neatly, pants, boots, even jackets, left in the open, as if someone had undressed for bed. In cases that ended with recovery, coroners wrote the same line again and again. Cause of death undetermined. No trauma, no exposure, nothing to explain why a healthy adult or child had simply ceased to be. Clusters matched the old maps. Places with a history of stories. Places where the woods ran deep and the trails faded. The patterns weren't random. They followed lines that didn't care about roads or rescue grids. The missing were often last seen on the edge of a group, just out of sight, or lagging behind. The time between last contact and disappearance was often measured in minutes. The rules didn't fit accidents or simple misadventure. They fit something watching, waiting, and then acting with precision. Paulides kept the checklist close, comparing each new case to the last. The further the list grew, the more it echoed the old reports, territorial markers, avoidance of open ground, an intelligence that understood how to erase a trail. The clusters weren't just points on a map. They were footprints of something that moved through the woods with purpose, leaving only questions behind. Official letters came back stamped with numbers that did not add up. One request for a list of Yosemite's missing, $34,000, payable up front. The same list for every park, every district, $1.4 million. No payment plan, no breakdown, just a number large enough to end the conversation. The language in the denials read like a dare. Not enough books in libraries. Not enough justification for media exemption. Not enough reason to hand over what should have been public. 70% of Freedom of Information Act requests bounced back. No files, no explanations, just a wall. Permits for filming met the same fate. Crews capped, locations off limits, applications lost in the shuffle. The process was never about logistics. It was about cost as a weapon, bureaucracy as a shield. Every barrier built higher than the last. Every answer wrapped in another layer of red tape. The Park Service did not have to say no. They just made yes impossible. Stacy Aras vanished in Yosemite in July 1981. 14 years old, last seen near Sunrise High Sierra Camp. Paulides filed a Freedom of Information Act request for her case file, expecting the usual red tape. The response landed like a dropped safe. Nearly 2,000 pages, withheld under Exemption 7A. Law enforcement purposes, they said. Release could interfere with future proceedings. That's not standard for a missing hiker. Most files run 50 pages, maybe 100 if the case drags. An NPS special agent told Paulides, flat out, "Don't bother, you'll never get it." The official letter confirmed it, case still open, decades later, and the file locked tight. Paulides pressed for details, appealed through Washington, got the same answer. The size of the file alone raised eyebrows. What could fill 2,000 pages for a girl who stepped out for a photograph and never came back? The number hung in the air, heavier than any explanation. For Paulides, it was confirmation. Not just a wall, an archive, guarded and growing. the kind you build when you're not just documenting loss, but protecting something bigger. Paulides stood outside the official circles now. Once, his badge opened doors. Now, his name triggered silent calls and closed files. Colleagues who had shared case notes and coffee stopped returning messages. The Park Service kept the wall up. Permits denied. Freedom of Information Act requests lost in the shuffle. The word commercial stamped on every letter as if it were a warning. He watched as younger officers learned to keep their questions quiet, to avoid the kind of trouble that followed a man who would not let go of the pattern. The risk was not just to his reputation. It bled into the work. Every new case came with a sense of isolation. No backup, no institutional memory, just a map, a stack of affidavits, and the quiet certainty that someone was watching the watchers. Families reached out, desperate for answers, but the official line never changed. No comment, no further information, case still open. In January 2025, the rules changed. The Film Act passed, ending permit requirements for small crews, 5 people or fewer. The law should have opened the parks to the cameras, but the silence lingered. Old habits die hard. Paulides kept filming, kept digging, but the sense of being on borrowed time grew sharper. Public interest surged. Forums lit up with theories, and the missing became a kind of folklore. But behind every headline, the questions deepened. If the patterns were real, what else was being kept quiet? And if the warnings went unanswered, who would be next to disappear without a trace? In this investigation, one fact stands out. 70% of David Paulides' Freedom of Information Act requests for missing person files were denied or heavily redacted by the National Park Service. The refusal to release over 1,900 pages related to the 1981 Stacey Arras disappearance, even after decades, highlights the depth of official secrecy. Paulides' career, from decorated police detective to marginalized researcher, demonstrates the professional risks involved in exposing these patterns. The documentary traced clear statistical overlaps between Bigfoot hotspot regions and missing 411 clusters, with Native American testimony and physical evidence adding further weight. Yet critical case files remain classified, and park authorities continue to restrict outside investigations. As of 2024, new permit laws further limit documentary access to these locations. The unanswered question remains: why do so many cases defy conventional explanation, and why are key records still withheld? Until full transparency is achieved, the intersection of unexplained disappearances and suppressed evidence will continue to cast a shadow over America's national parks.